didn't work.
Stand by. All right, the tape is rolling now. Anytime you're ready. This is,
Immerse.
Thank you. This is Immerse, the podcast and book. We are delighted to have you join us. Immerse is produced by Charlie Morrow, Sean McCann, and Bart Plantenga for Morrow Sound, Vermont, and Helsinki, and Recital Edition, Los Angeles. Immerse.
One, two, three.
I'm Charlie Morrow, and my Immerse podcast will guide you through the world of immersive experience in sound, light, and space. Welcome. Michael von Hausswolff, also known as CM Hausswolff, and personally as Mickey, was born in Sweden in 1956. He's unusual in that he readily admits he's a non-musician, untrained in any instrument, but still able to make music with available electronic gadgets. He is both a soundsmith and a visual artist, working intuitively in the area where sound meets light. He uses recording devices of various vintages, such as the video camera, the tape deck, radar, sonar, and numerous scientific devices. He investigates electrical currents and frequencies and how these relate to architectural space. His electronic voice phenomenon, EVP recordings, proposes conjuring up voices of the dead through radio signals, much like Moriconi proposed. His work has appeared at prestigious platforms and festivals such as Manifesta, Documenta, the Venice Biennale, and many others. His list of audio and visual work is long, esoteric, and intriguing, with provocative titles like 800,000 Seconds in Harar, The Wonderful World of Male Intuition, and There Are No Crows Flying Around the Hancock Building. He is also a curator, and if that isn't enough, he's King Michael I, or should I say King Mikael I, one of several kings of Elgaland Vargaland. This conceptual or conjectural nation, co-created with Leif Elgren, is a state of mind and a prize-winning art project that covers a great deal of territory. I've known Mickey since the early 1990s. I was part-time based in Copenhagen then, and met him in Gothenburg, Sweden, around radium 226.05. Originally an art gallery in Gothenburg, it became an independent record label, a magazine, an organizer of film festival and computer music festival, screenings and exhibitions. They had their own recording studio and video editing. Radium was formed as an independent label in 1983 by Hausswolff with Ulrich Hillebrandt, and later joined by Eric Pauser. Radium paralleled the work I was doing with New Wilderness Foundation in New York, with our studios, cassette label, Ear Magazine, and New Wilderness Journal, and public events. We both were close to composer sonographer Sten Hansen, based in Stockholm, where Mickey lives now, following the same model with M's Studios, Filkingen, Performance Space, record labels, festivals, most notably the historic Sound Poetry Festivals. The strong bond between Mickey and Sten was inspiring to the art community in Sweden, as they provided collaborative support to many artists in Sweden and internationally, including myself. Mickey, it's wonderful to have you join us on Immerse.
Phones off. Recording in progress. Very good.
Well, hey, thank you for agreeing to this interview. I'm going to ask you a little bit about your involvement with immersion and ideas of immersion. I'm a great fan of the work that you've done with light and sound and creating of spaces.
Sound, light, space.
I think that as an artist, you really, in a way, a multi-artist, multi-dimensions, and that this is what one of the really exciting things about your work, especially since I've known you for decades, and the work itself has kept growing in its vision. So, but going back to the beginning, where did you first have some idea of a change? You were with your parents, and then suddenly another world.
Yeah, I think it took quite some time. I grew up in Linköping, which is south of Stockholm here, and it's not really a small town. It doesn't have an art museum. It didn't have like a concert hall or anything like this. There were really, really good record stores. So my early development was in music, but also only in consuming, right? I listened to a lot of music, and I didn't really produce anything myself. But then when the artists showed up, especially musicians or composers showed up, were stating that you don't really have to know anything to do music. You don't have to know anything. I mean, you don't need anything. You just need to have some sort of sounding elements and compose with, and you don't have to have a kind of an education. You don't have to be able to play the violin or the guitar or whatever. You just start doing it. And then I realized that, well, okay, that's my point of entry for that creative world, just start doing things. And this was when I was maybe 16 or 17 years old, somewhere around there. But then there was a few things that, because I was thinking about immersion and that word, and when you become engulfed with something, when you sink into something and you feel that you are a part of something. And it was in 1975. It was quite an important year, I think. Actually, I haven't thought about it before. I started to think about it now when you stated the subject of talk, and then I realized in 1975 it was quite an important year, not only for record releases and so on, but also for me. I mean, I was like 18, 19, and I went with an American friend of mine. We went down to Germany and Austria skiing, and there was a certain part of when we went skiing down in Austria, and there was a certain part in the ski slope which was not steep, and it wasn't too flat, it wasn't too steep. It was just this kind of really, really nice flow moving through the woods. So it was like inside the forest. So you had the forest, and you had the snow and the skis, and you had the speed, but it wasn't that fast. It was just like this kind of slow movement. And then I just felt this bliss of being a part of this, with the wind and the skis and the snow under my feet and the moving down there and so on. And this just stuck with me, this flow, this flow of energy. And so it was a time when it was also the time when I started to listen to more, let's say, interesting music in terms of composition, Stockhausen, German free jazz, but also this kind of drone music that hadn't reached our regions from New York yet. I mean, the works of Lamont Young and Tony Conrad and Angus MacLeish and these kind of things, it hadn't really reached our shores. But there was this quite interesting minimal music by Brian Eno and Robert Fripp, which was just drone music, and this had the same kind of movement in it, the same flow, the same kind of feeling of what Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari would call rhizome. It doesn't have an ending, it doesn't have a beginning, it's just a stem of energy flowing. And this caught me really at the same time. So the skiing in the forest and this kind of feeling and this music that I've never heard before really startled me. So that was kind of the beginning, and it just took a few years, and I didn't really do so much. I played in some kind of bands or whatever, but actually I didn't really understand what I was doing myself in these bands, and the band members, they were turning around looking at me and like, what are you doing, There's all this big noise coming from my mini Moog synthesizer or whatever. But so I moved to Gothenburg. So I moved there in 1978 to 3 years later, and then I started to develop these kind of works. So yeah, that's a little bit the story of that beginning.
Well, it's fascinating because I met you, I think it was in 79.
Yeah.
So we met quite right in the middle of this story. And,
yeah.
And got the scene, though, in Gothenburg was really very special because you created a performance space, you had a record label, you had a magazine, and the community aspect of it, I think, was particularly important because it meant that what you were doing related to people's ongoing lives, just like the music you describe. It was life itself.
Yeah, it became very much a part of it. That experience from feeling, I mean, I've had this nature feeling before. I mean, I remember clearly when I grew up at the countryside in the 60s, when I was out in the forest or out in the fields, and the times when the temperature matched my clothing and everything became sort of, how do you say, like when you move down into these Epsom salt flotation tanks with a body temperature salt water, and you float around there, and you don't have this feeling of temperature or gravity, right? And with this skiing experience, and I brought this along to Gothenburg, and we had something called Radium. You remember the record label Radium and so on. And we didn't start it as a record label. We were doing all these exhibitions and computer music festivals and whatever. But we wanted it to be an artwork in itself. I'm not sure that we succeeded 100%, but our aim was that Radium 22605 should be an artwork, and it should contain everything, just like life itself, and it should have this flow of the various people's energy just flowing through this, including ourselves. And we didn't want to go to other record labels to just stand there like some Oliver Twist with some soup bowl, asking for more soup or whatever. Let's do it ourselves, And then we realized that people like you and Sten Hansson and Fylkingen, these kind of places in Stockholm and so on, they were basically doing it themselves too. Just do it yourself, and involve other people because you're kind of a herds person, we're some kind of a herd, we're a flock of a horde of artists just wanting to do things. And you didn't even have to like what the others were doing, You're just like, okay, you're doing your thing and I'm doing my thing, and maybe you don't understand shit about what the others are doing, but let's just have them do it anyway, because it's their flow. So we had that kind of thing. And later when we met in New York, I remember.
J'ai vu New York USA. J'ai vu New York USA. J'ai jamais rien vu d'autre.
You were also involved with the restaurant and the magazine you had and all that kind of things. And I thought that was like brilliant, to include food and everything, and you just have everything there. Yeah.
Well, I think we were on parallel beams somehow. And I felt that all along, because I also thought maybe the other side of that is just simply that you are plugged into life, and therefore you're able to understand the artfulness of life and life in art, as opposed to kind of a silo, which is often the way it is within the academy, where art is put on a pedestal. As Jackson McLowe nicely put it in one of his poems, the sun has to meet the following requirements in order to be a star.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's that's a good quote, and it's like it's really like that, and this it's also a big learning process, right? And I very early accepted, since I didn't really want to learn how to become a composer or a musician or something. I just and even nowadays, when a musician comes up to me and asks me if I'm a musician, I say, no, I'm not a musician. But I mean, I play concerts, with my instruments, which is the mixer, the recorded material, and the sine wave generators and whatever. But for me, very early, I just realized that this learning process will never stop. This private university that people establish by themselves is actually really a private universe, because this new information coming in all the time, and it's important to be constantly open for this influx of information or experiences and so on. So this has been very important for me to be able to accept things. Acceptance is a very important thing, which is a very Sufi thing. And I was very early. I have not studied Sufism, but I was reading some things, and it just really caught me that this is like a very, very important thing for me, to be able to first accept things and then evaluate it in either way, right? So this process of learning, and also try to be humble to life and nature, not to be some kind of, exploiter of whatever, and for greed or egocentricity and so on. And these things are very difficult to handle because you are exposed to this all the time in society, this egotism and this competition of people, elbowing their ways, through and trying to, be the best or whatever, trying to be winners or so on. And then it's so difficult to do it, but it's important to actually be able to face that and to see through that. And this goes with fear too. It's important because fear has been always a very kind of a very special, hindrance. If you don't face fear, you are kind of stuck and you don't get anywhere, and you have to kind of challenge these kind of fears and obstacles that might be in your way, and to be basically the same person that I was, in the 70s, just have that, to maintain that feeling of flow and of life,
Oh, it's wonderful to hear you say that. When I first met, I think we maybe even had this conversation. It's why it's bubbling up now, was that one of the traditional ideas in the north of Europe is a big world, little human beings. It's a very old idea, but it's made it possible to survive in very difficult environments, like at sea or, in storms or during years of famine, that if you see yourself as small, it's so much easier to negotiate solutions because you don't assume that you're in control. But I remember that conversation was one of the attractors for me as an American coming to Sweden and beginning to feel those kind of thoughts, because we have American exceptionalism in my generation. There was it's the roots of the Republican Party. Make America great again. Well,
yeah, I know. Yeah. I mean, it's also something to battle with for Scandinavians as well, to be able to have that kind of personal, individual independence. And I think people of the Scandinavians are the best of maintaining their independence and being really creative are the Finns, the people from Finland, artists and musicians and composers from Finland. They are really good at seeing it and being it in that kind of way. They never really boast out their chests, but they have the Finnish sisu, which is like a never give up idea. And I love it.
Good idea.
Yeah, you like never give up. It's like, it's just, okay, you can say what you want, but we will never give up. And a lot of other Scandinavians have this kind of, let's say, minority feel. You don't have to be Donald Trump, you don't have to be that kind of, nobody has to be that way, and then maybe that's why a lot of people here in Scandinavia, at least, maybe in Europe, I don't know, don't really understand the American way now with the Republican Party and so on. We don't really understand how this... I mean, we have crazy politicians here too in Europe, of course. You have these right-wing horrors, everywhere, but they're not so transparent as Trump is. It's like, it's an impossibility. So I can understand what you say. So we just try to get by, and see what's going on. And it took a long time for me to, I did some performance art and so on, also in combination with, because I was interested in some theatrical movements, theatrical ideas by Antonin Artaud and these kind of people that wanted to kind of go beyond theater. wanted things to be real. Also the Vienna actionismus, like Schwarzkogler, Hermann Nietzsche, and these kind of people, they were interested. I started to do some of these things too, and then I met Leif Ellegren, who said, well, you actually, what you're doing is, performance art. Maybe you should read the book or something. And then, of course, I went to the bookshop and bought this Rose Lee Goldberg performance art book, which is like a standard kind of book. And then later, when I met her, I said to her, well, why do you have so many Americans in there? There's a lot of the Europeans you have, the only ones are like Joseph Beuys and some other, so what's going on, And she said, well, it's just the funding, nobody funded me to do this book, so I haven't really been able to travel anywhere to see what was going on in the other countries in the world, But still, a lot of things I was doing, I hadn't really an idea of that actually it was called something, or it took actually quite a long time before I stumbled over the activities, of you guys too, and like Stenhausen and you, and that kind of, 60s avant-garde New York thing. It took a long time for me to experience, the minimalism of La Monte Young. There was a Music for 18 Musicians by Steve Reich came out, that minimalist kind of piece, which I love. Really. But also you had Philip Glass, which I wasn't really that interested in. I thought he was a little bit too much of that academy composer kind of guy, not really close to the nature in that kind of sense. But it took a long time for the arts to come to me.
But that was, I think, quite natural. For many years as I know you, it's my grandmother used to say that each of us has to grow ourselves, and I felt you've been growing yourself in your own way all these years.
Yeah,
I remember you when we met when you were in Gothenburg, and talking now, I can make these connections. But
yeah,
for me, there's also been some enormous growth. Let me jump to the color field work that you've done. I think that there was a point in your work when the color of light became important as a part of your vocabulary as an artist. And I wish you'd talk a little to that, because I find that work to be amongst the most original work of our time, and I really admire it tremendously for its simplicity and clarity. It's like opening a door in a world that Mickey's discovered. So would you talk a little bit about how you made that, what you were thinking, and so forth?
Well, it was just since I've been with one foot in the visual art world and one foot in the musical world, so to speak. And for me, it's all the same, right? But for the institutions are not the same, and people are very, very keen on categorizing things and so on. And there was a point where I was irritated by the fact that a lot of people in the visual art world didn't know anything about the music and the sound world. This was before sound art became a kind of a fashion, right? And then I was trying to think of something that had this combination. And then I had some friends in Finland, the Panasonic guys in the band Panasonic, Mika Vainio and Ilpo Vesinen. They were using an oscillator as a backdrop for their electronic music. And that reminded me of John Cage and Marcel Duchamp playing chess, electrified the movements through oscilloscopes way back. And I also reminded me of Peter Sellers using an oscilloscope in I think it was The Party or some really funny films. And I thought, the oscilloscope is really interesting. Maybe I can use this. And then I started to experiment with that. And then I needed a concept. And the concept was EVP, because I had started to use EVP, electronic voice phenomena, to record voices from the other side, because I wanted to have it as an instrument of sound to use in the music or in the art. And then I realized that if I put an induction microphone on a electrical socket, I will hear the 50 hertz sine wave, dirty kind of sine wave in Europe, 60 hertz in America, right? And then if I take that signal into an oscilloscope and then magnify that, put it into through a video projector, I could project this really large on the walls. and have the sound at the same time and claim that there are souls living inside the electrical systems in the world as a possibility. And this was a way for me to use sound and vision at the same time and get people to understand that sound and vision is actually just frequencies, and then take it from there. So that was how I started to use light in that kind of sense. And then I started to use radar technology because I wanted to have that kind of sound technology that you cannot hear, but it's still sound. I mean, radar is frequencies, but you can't hear it as a human being, right? But you can see it on the radar screen. So I put a camera in front of the radar screen and then put it large on the space on the wall. And then I said to people, look, there's some changes in the rotating radar scanner. And there's changes in the image. And that means that something in this room that we cannot see, but and so on. Because it comes some kind of, artistic kind of evidence for ghosts or something living in just on the side of you at the same time. So this is how I started to work with light, and then I developed light systems into more lighting up architecture, lighting up derelict houses, and starting to work in these kind of ways.
Thank you for explaining the origin. It seems now very, very clear. It reminds me that Moriconi, when he invented radio, had in mind communicating with the dead. That was one of his goals. He was mystical in that respect. And ironically, when you turn any radio on these days, more than 50% of the voices and music you hear is from dead people anyway.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I think Edison had some kind of ideas. Maybe he took those from Marconi too, and I think Nikola Tesla had some kind of ideas of this too in the early days of electronics and telecommunication and so on. It's really interesting. I mean that. So yes, and I still do EVP kind of recordings here and there, and take interest in these kind of things from an artistic point of view. I never want to prove anything. I'm not a scientist. I'm an artist. As you know, we artists, we never need to prove anything. We can lie as much as we want.
Are you working on anything now that you would like to talk about in this interview?
Well, no, I'm just continuing with things. It's just an ongoing process, everything. I mean, but I really enjoy collaborating with other artists. That's maybe something I would want to express too, that I do solo works, I do things, I get really tired of myself. And sometimes when I do things, I find it, I get curious, but I get more curious if I work with somebody else. And you get this kind of merge of two personalities, two people merging their own ideas into it. And then for me, it's really interesting because then there is always something that I cannot grasp and understand in the work. And I really like that. And of course, it's mostly the other person's input that I don't understand. But this is great. So I have a project with an American, Chandra Shukla. He's Californian, but he lives in North Carolina. But we have something called Travelogue, where we go to various places and just randomly for 10 days record things everywhere, things that we come by, a lot of bells, a lot of machinery, a lot of society works, and then we compose this into something called Travelogue Nepal, Travelogue Bali. Recently, a couple of weeks ago, we were in northern Thailand and Cambodia. And then I started to work with another guy, Christopher Chaplin. And we have been doing some works with older poetry by Lord Byron. And it's also nice to connect to older things. And Byron, or English poetry, was something that I never really could get. It's like, what the fuck is that? And then suddenly, well, why don't I just get into it? Why don't I immerse myself into it and see if I can actually understand what's going on? So we picked a poem by Lord Byron called The Prisoner of Chillon, which it's not a long poem, it's a short poem about older days when there was a prisoner in a castle called Chillon in Switzerland, and he was a prisoner there for 7 years. And Byron was, he got, well, immersed in this person's fate, of sitting there in the dungeon for 7 years, So he wrote this poem, and it's really a beautiful poem. The reason was also that, which also connects to life, because I went to school in Switzerland for a short while in Vevey by the Lake Geneva. And Christopher Chaplin was born in Vevey. His parents was Charlie Chaplin and Una Chaplin. So we were probably in the record store in Vevey in 1972 at the same time, And and then we said, let's do something about that region. And then I asked him, what do you say if I say Chateau de Chillon? He said Lord Byron, and then, okay, let's do something there. So this is also the same flow as we've been talking about. It's just floating on as we speak. That's what I'm doing now.
Well, that's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for today's conversation. I'm delighted to spend this time with you. I don't think we've had a focused chat like this since maybe when we first met in Gothenburg. And possibly, with Sten Hansen in a group setting in Stockholm somewhere in the 80s. But this is a real treat. And I look forward to seeing you soon in Finland.
Yeah, me too.
We'll stay in touch. And I wish you, good health and good times. We'll be keeping in touch.
Lovely, lovely. Thank you.
Thank you. Moi moi.
Moi moi, moi moi.
Thank you. This is Immerse, the podcast and book. We are delighted to have you join us. Immerse is produced by Charlie Morrow, Sean McCann, and Bart Plantenga for Morrow Sound, Vermont and Helsinki, and Recital Edition, Los Angeles.
Immerse. Immerse. Immerse.
An empty shell fall back into the sea.
When I push this one button, it causes...
Immerse.